from Electrocraft.
Welcome to Room Tone. My name is William Garrett. The room tone for today's conversation comes from Electrocraft East, my studio in New York City. The room tone is altered by the voice of Oscar-nominated feature film director and screenwriter JC Chandor. After shooting industrials and commercials in New York City, Chandor burst on the scene in 2011 with the film Margin Call. He wrote and directed his debut film about the financial crisis of 2007 and put together an amazing ensemble cast, including Kevin Spacey, Jeremy Irons, Demi Moore, and Stanley Tucci. The film was a major success and garnered Chandor an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Chandor went from a large cast with compelling dialogue to a silent man fighting for his life alone and adrift on a boat in the intense film All Is Lost. Our man, as listed in the credits, is the one and only Robert Redford in a performance of a lifetime. Next came the thriller A Most Violent Year, a film that depicts a treacherous New York City and one man's battle to stay honest and still achieve his dreams. In this interview, we talk about early films made with the family video camera, how being dyslexic helps hone the skills of memory and observation that come in handy as a screenwriter and film director, how a brief stint in Hollywood sent him quickly back east, and trying hard not to screw up a pitch meeting with the legendary Robert Redford. Well, JC, thanks a million for coming in to have a chat with me today. You came into this steamy city.
I
did. I appreciate that very much.
It's the deep July humidity out there.
Did you catch that thunderstorm that just rolled over?
I did, but I amazingly had an umbrella in the back of my car, so I felt super prepared.
Wow, man, that very seldom happens. I want to go back and talk to you about the first time you thought about leading a creative life. Did it happen when you were young? And how was it influenced by where you grew up, your parents, teachers, mentors, folks like that? What led you down the creative path?
I grew up in a suburban New Jersey, so about as far away from Hollywood as you can get. My dad is a banker, and my mom is a visual artist, but works as an art consultant. So she's in the painting and visual arts field. So I knew absolutely no one that had ever gone to LA and kind of made a living doing this. So, but that being said, my parents were insanely supportive. Almost too supportive, I think.
So you did get some artistic influence from your mother then, right?
Absolutely. My mom, she was a big believer in visual arts, and that certainly showed me that, you didn't have to be a lawyer or a banker to make a living. But as far as the actual entertainment business, I had no connection with it whatsoever.
Well, now you say that your parents were almost too supportive, so they were just sort of happy that you pursued anything that was down a creative path?
I think they just believed that was what the best thing you could do as a parent would be to support whatever it is that your kid's drawn to. But I think looking back on it later in life, there was a mild sense of urgency that was missing from my enterprise, which I think as any sort of middle-class kid, that's of course the great speed bump, is that there isn't that urgency. You kind of believe that there will always be time.
Right, and something will always happen and you'll get through because that's the way your surroundings are.
Yeah, and I think looking back on it, it wasn't until I realized that isn't true that a great sense of urgency came up. But in my earlier life, it was an amazing experience to have them be supporting all these different kind of ideas that I had, and so it started as acting. So I was never a great actor by any stretch of the imagination, but I think at a public high school in New Jersey, that's sort of your way in. I was drawn to the show of it all. I definitely love the camaraderie. I love I was a fairly serious athlete growing up, and so I love the performance side of it, that there was this kind of tension, obviously, and then you had to actually, when the light went on or the curtain went up, you had to go. And so, but the weirdest thing is my dad actually in about second or third grade, bought a video camera, and I have an older sister. And so, of all things, that was actually really the first experience I had making any kind of films. And my sister and I, along with 5 or 6 kids in our neighborhood, put on fairly elaborate, they were usually musicals.
I love it.
Because I have a 4-year older sister, so she was involved with musical theater. And so we filmed and put on these very elaborate sort of reviews, pre-editing equipment or anything like that. All the editing was done in camera, but we...
So you had to lay it all out and do your shot, just turn it on and turn it off.
Literally turn it on, turn it off. Those were done in the basement of our house, and my mom's actually transferred a bunch of those.
I was just going to say, did any of those survive?
A couple of them did. Sadly, the quality is significantly degraded. But, there was one like George Washington meets Abraham Lincoln, which of course never actually was able to happen, but
in a musical,
which was a pretty intense.
Now, were you doing original songs?
That one I think was. We did a Christmas review once, a holiday review that was my favorite, where that was all lip syncing. But
I'd love to see that.
The idea, that you can actually put something down on film that then someone, even if it's just your family members in your living room at Christmas, will actually sit for half an hour and watch and laugh and react to. That, the first sort of feedback that I got from any kind of a sort of visual medium that I did was actually those little movies in my basement, of all things.
Were you able to continue that anyway in high school?
Yeah, we moved for 3 years in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade to the American School in London. And the American School in London in St. John's Wood has an amazing arts program, both traditional visual arts and the theater and drama program. And they probably now have a big film program, I would imagine. But that was where, for the first time, I got parts that were, a little bit outside of just the chorus or something.
So you moved up in the ranks as an actor a little bit.
Started to realize that I had a propensity towards that, and at least understanding what it was that put the whole thing together. And I got really into photography at that time. That was my first real exploration, was still photography, and really got into developing, and Ansel Adams became my hero, and
you're echoing my high school experience exactly.
Totally. And then I came back to the U.S. I went back into the public high school that I'd been in, and there was an amazing photo teacher. She was the first person who saw 3 or 4 of my images and were like, these are actually, extraordinary. These are, they're really good. And that was the first time anyone really academically, for the most part, had ever said that to me.
Wow. So from the video camera to then really exploring still photography, so you're really honing your visual skills.
Yeah, it was, I think just exciting to realize, again, that you could go off, capture something, not quite know what you had back in those days, because obviously it was film, but then come back and, the surprises that came out of that were so beautiful. And then to have something that lived on and that people actually put on their walls was super cool.
When did writing come into all this? Because obviously that's become a big part of your process today.
I don't know. That's a very interesting question. No one's ever actually asked me the question before. I'm dyslexic, and I didn't know that. I was undiagnosed dyslexic. So, but I always knew there was a problem with my reading, and didn't quite know what it was, whether it was laziness or whatever.
It's always pegged as that when you're young. But
I know. Yeah, and I was not, and I was I have a fairly high IQ, and I'm a really good bullshitter. So I was in a big...
I saw that description in an interview I read with you, and it completely cracked me up. It's like what it allows you to do, being dyslexic. You can't do this, but you can do this, so you just bullshit your way through all this stuff.
Yeah, but of course it's not, I use that term a little, it's not actually bullshit, because bullshit is not based on any factual
right, exactly.
Elements. And so what I was able to do was pay very, very close attention in class always. So I was always, listening. And then did do some reading, what I was able to. I just was not able to. I'm not severely dyslexic, so right. I'm able to read, but not at any kind of a pace.
It makes you focus on using other skills, listening and memorizing, and because you don't want to be, Especially in high school or something, you don't want to be caught short without the answer. So if you can't do the reading part, you just figure out another way to do it. So you're right, it's not really bullshit. It's just figuring out another way
to learn. And you're obviously missing some stuff, but I learned that very early on, like second, third grade. I can, and I didn't know I was doing it, but I can remember reading ahead and then almost memorizing the things so that when I was called on, I was able to kind of nail it. And so I was in the highest reading groups, through third or fourth grade, but literally was missing out huge chunks of it looking back on it.
So writing seemed like a faraway thing because of this issue.
I don't think it was
be the first thing you'd
be drawn to. Exactly.
Exactly.
So the first script that I ever wrote was, not until college. But I started to be drawn towards films sort of in my freshman and sophomore year of college. Of high school.
Were you ever writing any short stories or any little things like that?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I was, but I was certainly, it was never a problem. Writing short stories, doing writing assignments was not a huge problem for me, but I was not receiving, I'm just sort of thinking of this as I'm saying it, but I was not receiving any positive feedback at all on my writing, which is too bad, looking back on it. And I think, I'm one of my kids sadly inherited my similar traits on this front, and they have such a different experience because we're able to steer them towards the strengths,
right, exactly.
and it's been so wonderful for them.
But your writing was more focused on cinema, so you really thought, I'm going to write a screenplay as opposed to I'm going to write a story or a book or anything like that?
Yeah, I was in high school right at the time when Soderbergh and all those guys were blowing up at Sundance.
Right.
And so the idea that there was an entry-level point into the entertainment business that wasn't sort of the straight Hollywood angle, which of course I knew absolutely nothing about. But, the idea that you could raise a little money and go shoot something with a video camera and then turn that into a movie, that was something, going back to the basement with my sister, that was something that I understood, and as technology was moving forward and I, through still photography, was sort of staying up to date with, had an understanding of films and exposure and all these things that you don't need as much anymore now. But at that time, if you were going to put something on film, you had to understand that.
So you were looking at an entire project. So you were writing something with the thought of, I'm going to make this film as a director and as a writer.
Absolutely. And it came, I always joke that a lot of that came from sort of this ego standpoint, which is that I felt like I could just do that. And I think that does go back to the support my parents had. If someone had been telling me no to a lot of things in my life, I may have been scared off of that.
So you felt confident you could write the story, make the film,
which
edit
of course
the film, act in the film.
Which is of course completely absurd from a kid, a dyslexic kid from New Jersey. But that confidence that my ideas were worthwhile, both my parents, never said no, that wasn't a possibility.
Where'd you go to college?
I applied to a bunch of acting conservatory schools and did auditions, but through that process really realized that I did not want to be an actor. And that was, I think, the first awakening where I was like, I want to be sitting on the other side of this table, not sitting here being judged, basically. But I did, through that process, start to see that, there might be some other jobs in that world that were really interesting that I could excel at. And so I ended up going to the College of Worcester, which is in Worcester, Ohio. It's a good little liberal arts school. And they have an amazing independent study program, which is basically your final junior and senior year. You do these sort of thesis projects, which basically count as an entire class. And I came up pretty early on in my freshman year that for my thesis projects, I wanted to do a film. And so the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I started to do other classes. I came into NYU for one summer and started to do film classes. And started to be a little bit more driven towards exactly what I wanted to do. Of course, still flailing miserably.
Of course. What was it like making your film for that senior thesis? It must have been quite an experience.
It was misguided and I spent too much money and
you again basically did everything yourself. You wrote it, you directed it, you cast it.
And lessons learned from that. I think had I been at a film school, I would have learned so much more about the technical and sort of structural elements of putting a film together.
So you were sort of bushwhacking your way through this.
Yeah, it was a total disaster because I shot that film between my junior and senior year, and a typical kid who's been going to NYU film school, what they're able to do between their junior and senior year is considerably ahead of where I was technically and within the industry. But I had gone to a liberal arts school that forced me to take history and, religious studies classes and tons of different ways of learning that I never would have gotten if I was at a pure technical school for film. And in the end, those things helped my writing and storytelling. So the film was a failure, but of course, in the end, it was not. I learned so much.
Of course, an incredible learning experience.
Yeah.
So after that, you ended up in Los Angeles?
Yeah. So I was a PA on music videos, trying to shoot some, but writing, interesting, was kind of the first real momentum I got was going out and doing an internship on a television show, sort of as a writing assistant. But then I realized that Los Angeles wasn't for me creatively. I sort of, within 2 weeks of being there, kind of my goals were changing and not for the better. Mm-hmm. My target was getting lowered and lowered and lowered. And so I realized, and frankly, looking back on it, ego-wise, it drove me crazy and totally made me insecure and out of my head, that so many people were doing it. They were everywhere.
Everywhere
you walk into a Kinko's and it was like the most depressing thing on the planet. And that's an old copy center for people that don't even know what a Kinko's is anymore. Right. But that used to be a big hub of activity in Los Angeles when you were printing your scripts and you were doing your headshots or whatever. And I found just instead of the idea of there being camaraderie and sort of a collective, approach, I wanted to immediately get the hell out of there and not be surrounded by so many people who were struggling at the same thing I was trying to do.
So out of Hollywood and back to New York.
Back. It was, amazing. I came back here and then actually started to make stuff, and I was like, that's what I should want to do. And so started to do little industrials. My first real break was a friend of my now wife's, at the time girlfriend, who was in the fashion business, and he repped still photographers. And so I would, watch these huge photo shoots happen, and then I would have to sort of create a little industrial video, that would be used for promotional purposes, but it was not the main potato. But the neat thing was I was getting access to sort of the most beautiful models, the best fashion, the best makeup and hair. So these things looked a little better, especially once they were cut down to 30 seconds. And I only had about 2 of them, but you could kind of, even the photographers are all in the fashion business, so they're dressed up looking good. So I remember I created my first sort of fake commercial off of one of those. I had my first little use with some visual effects at that time. And so I created 2 or 3 little spots, and then I had a pretty good short film that I had put together. So I went back and kind
made
of
another film.
Yeah, and that was difficult because you sort of feel like you're going backwards, but made a 12-minute short film that actually was, again, stronger and had a beginning, middle, and end, had pretty decent performances, and that was a breakthrough.
One of my favorite memories of you is getting to know you through Marshall and knowing you I think during this time when you were sort of doing commercials, and then not seeing you for a couple of years, and then seeing you at a beach fire and saying, "Hey, JC, what's happening?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm making this little movie," and "Oh, really? Who's in it?" "Oh, Kevin Spacey, Demi Moore, Stanley Tucci, Jeremy Irons." You completely blew my mind with the margin call story, and I think you had just shot it and were about to go back. You were taking a break.
It was the 4th of July.
Yeah.
We had a break.
So tell me about that transition from where you were to margin call.
Yeah, it's a crazy, crazy transition. So I spent about 7 years with one script that I was obsessed with getting made. Mm-hmm. And so while I was doing all those commercials, I felt being a feature film director, I would be good at that. And so I kind of obsessively tried for 7 years to get this single script made. And almost did. I was about 6 days away. We had a good portion of the money up front, had all the actors lined up, blah, 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 the whole thing. And it spectacularly blew up when an investor kind of walked away from a bunch of projects at once.
Oh, man.
And then my script had like $400,000 against it, as we say in the film business, meaning it had been spent on it. And then the guy who owned that debt basically ended up going into bankruptcy. And so I think that script is still owned by an Icelandic bankruptcy court, of all things.
Wow. So it's really in turnaround in a big way.
Yeah, it is lost in the Icelandic. It was this guy who literally ended up going to jail. I think remember when Iceland basically went bankrupt.
Right, I remember.
He and his family were partially responsible for that. So he pulled out of a bunch of investments, and this film that I'd spent 7 years on sort of blew up.
That must have been devastating, especially since you, as you say, were obsessing over it so much.
This was the one that was going to, quote unquote, change my life. And my daughter had been born at that time, so I had like a 1.5-year-old child, and starting to feel the pressures of that. And so I took a little break and tried to look around and say, hey, I've been trying to do this for 10 years. I've had some success in the commercial and music field, but look, I wanted to be a feature film director. And so...
Were you thinking about stopping at that point?
Totally.
Maybe it was time to give up? You
just
have a family and all that?
Because of like necessity,
right.
The facts. We were burning through savings, the whole 9 yards. And then this massive kind of recession starts to, but it wasn't even a recession at this point. My dad is an investment banker, or was, and so I started to see this crash kind of coming. And I had never written anything remotely that topical before, but I was like, look, a lot of my friends went into this, banking field in New York while I've been a poor artist guy, and they've been, and a lot of them got spit out in different ways. But I had also just been watching my dad and his, associates kind of go through this life, and was always a really close observer. So I wrote a script that I'd been I was like, maybe write something about this. And so I wrote a script in, I've said it many times, but basically wrote a script in about 4 days that was about 82 pages long. And, it was creatively one of those moments that you hope for your entire life. Basically, the script for what became Margin Call came out sort of stream of consciousness, really didn't change much of that dialogue, if any, of those 82 pages in that one sitting. I then went back about 2 weeks later and fleshed out another 10 pages probably of some stuff. 10, 15 pages, I think. But that original document, uncorrected,
I like that.
Uncorrected. So no spelling errors, some issues. I was very superstitious about it. I basically gave it to two people, one on the West Coast, one here on the East Coast. And each of them strategically sort of placed and said, do you think there's a movie here? And that was it. That script never was really revised again.
Where did you get the technical knowledge? Because to me, I watched the film, and my father, also a banker, and he and I actually watched it together. His banking experience in North Carolina was much more Mayberry-esque, and I assume that your father's banking experience in New York was much more like the film Wall Street. So, but I was just amazed at your technical knowledge and also interested in how you decided to place it all in one night. And I think that's fascinating.
So there's a bunch of things. I mean, the first one goes back to the liberal arts education, which is I had been personally fascinated by the build-up, people getting so rich, right? So in New York at that time, from when I graduated until, there'd been that little blip with the dot-com boom, but really there'd been like a 15-year crazy build-up in capital, and I've always had an interest in that business. And the neat thing that I realized pretty early on as a writing trick is I wanted the film, margin call that is, to be approachable to a wide audience. So most of the things in that film and why people in the banking sector believe that it's honest and representational of their life is because emotionally, the reasons all those characters are doing the things they're doing are very, very premeditated, thought through, and they're people that I actually knew. In fact, lots of people in each of those characters, from Penn Badgley's kind of young recruit guy through to Irons and Spacey, who are sort of these tattered, grizzled veterans, and everyone in between. Every one of those people had a very specific entire life story that I had built into that script that rang true to people within the business, and people who know people within that business know why Jeremy Irons' character is making some of those decisions that he is.
Right.
Those were the things that I nailed. If you actually go back and look at that movie, there's very little, there's enough so that it's not like I'm avoiding something, but there's very little. In fact, we had to edit out a lot of the numbers and technical jargon that was actually in there, because in the end I realized it just wasn't even necessary.
And really the script spoke to the actors, to the people who financed, to everybody.
It was this script, so that was the fun thing. It sort of it spoke to them, and then starting that day when we started to send it out to people, probably 2 weeks later, we had Ben Kingsley, which was a big get at the time, attached to play the Jeremy Irons role. So we offered him kind of this cold deal, amazingly said yes. And from that standpoint, we just started attaching different actors. And the next thing we know, we probably have 5 or 6 actors attached. But then, of course, in the way life works, this fun plot point that I had turned into a movie had turned into, the largest depression, recession, explosion.
The timing of this is just phenomenal.
But it's a disaster because we can't raise any money, right? So now we've got a cast.
How funny is that?
But
you've written a movie about a crash, and then the crash comes, and you can't finance the movie.
Because literally that summer, which was I think the summer of 2009, it is catastrophic, Wow. I mean, catastrophic. That was the summer when Bear Stearns literally just vanished and went out of business, and all this horrible shit was happening. So, we had a great cast, and we were only looking for, I think, $1.5 million, but it was crickets,
man.
And so that cast by September literally fell apart.
I was going to say, because if it doesn't move fast enough, people go on to
other things.
Right.
And so the entire thing blows up, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, whoa, are we back at square one? But amazingly, that fall, everyone stuck with it, and we put a few new pieces in place, and then Kevin Spacey signed on to play. I'd offered him the CEO role, but he signed on to actually play the more sympathetic, empathetic role that he ended up playing so beautifully. And then, a couple other pieces obviously fell into place. And so that spring, we went to I didn't, but our sales representative went to the Cannes Film Festival, where they have a marketplace, and we basically sold the film, and so a month later we're shooting. And so the neat thing is I'd spent 7 years trying to get this other script, but from literally the first time I showed the script to anyone to rolling film took, I think, 11 months. So
That's
it just
amazing.
happened,
That's
very
amazing.
quickly, and the script was good. The script, people, actors responded immediately to the material, and that's sort of been the key to my career since. As I realized, if you write something that actors kind of will respond to, everything else usually falls into place.
Was it intimidating for you to work with such a high quality and well-known cast?
On that first day, what I realized was, look, all of these people showed up here because of this script, so the script must be pretty good. So get the script on film with these people saying it, and you're probably going to be, it's as if Norah Jones walks into your studio and you've got a beautiful song and she fell in love with the song, which is why she's in the room in the first place. Let her sing the song, and
Exactly.
and at least start with that, and then maybe you can start to bring in some other things once you realize you've made it a little bit.
Obviously, it went well because the critical acclaim was through the roof, and then, of course, the Oscar nomination for the screenplay. That must have been quite a thrilling time for you.
It was a crazy year. By the second or third day of shooting, I sort of knew this is what I was meant to do, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time in my life, obviously. And you're sort of looking around and you're going, I can do this job, and not just do it, but I actually can keep the idea of the whole film in my head at once while worrying about these micro little details and all the things that you need to do that job well. And those things were happening as we were progressing forward, and I was getting really positive feedback from these amazingly talented actors, and they were giving great performances. So we edit that film, and it starts to come together pretty tightly. So we trudged off to the Sundance Film Festival, which obviously, going back 15 years, had become this holy grail of a place to show your first film. I had the absolute time of my life. I was scared out of my wits that it wasn't going to work out, but we had our entire cast back together. Literally all 8 primary roles were there. Wow. And we got 1 terrible review and I think 2 good reviews, which is just enough, and sold the film to a reputable distributor that was passionate about it. And then momentum started to build over the next 7 months before the film was released, which was more than you ever could have hoped for. And then fast forward another couple months, and the next thing I know, I'm at the Academy Awards with my parents up in the balcony and my wife and I sitting there. And that, changes my career completely.
Yeah, of course.
So you're able to get things financed that you never would be able to. So I had written, while editing Margin Call, this crazy idea for a movie about one guy alone on a boat.
Well, this is what I was going to interject in my, I don't see JC but every couple of years. The next time I run into you in the general store in the tiny town in Rhode Island and say, hey, what's up? And you go, I'm making this little movie about a guy, on a sailboat. Who's the guy? Oh, Robert Redford. I'm like, you're kidding me. And so
that was this crazy idea. I'm starting to get offered some jobs as I'm editing Margin Call, because Hollywood is a very insecure place, and so, but once you start to get a little success, people flock towards it, and I did not want to fuck that up. And so I took my next career moves. I started to take myself really seriously as I was editing Margin Call, and was like, this is your time, this is your shot here. So what is it? And so I looked at all these other movies, which I like to joke were, Margin Call in a law firm, with a sex scene, or Margin Call in a police station with a gun. And so they were basically asking me to do the exact same thing I just did.
That's classic. That's classic of music and film.
Right.
It's like just
do it again.
Right. And it takes a lot of balls to put one man on a boat.
I mean, it does take a lot of balls, but it also, in a weird way, what I realized was, like, if I could actually figure out some way of financing this thing, those other projects would probably still be there, because they'd be like, oh, he went and did some crazy thing. Because the worst thing I noticed that you can do is if you go do the same thing again, but you do the B- version of it, suddenly you're done.
Yeah.
In a weird way, whether I was just being delusional or not, I actually convinced myself you're going to get credit for doing something ballsy.
Right.
But in the end, like, maybe this bizarrely is the safest route.
Interesting.
Except, the film had to work.
Right.
That is a risk with a movie with no words, an old man on a boat, stuck in the middle of the ocean. You're not sure if it's even going to work at all. But if I could get it to the B- stage, I knew I was probably covered.
When you were making Margin Call, you said that there was a moment you kind of saw it all coalesce, and you knew the actors were working, the script was working, all that kind of stuff. And All Is Lost, where did that moment come? Because
that moment never came.
Right.
Until the premiere in front of 2,500 people in one of the most beautiful places you could ever show a movie, which is the gala premiere at the Cannes Film Festival with Robert Redford sitting next to me, my wife on one side, his wife's on the other, and then everybody else we knew who made the movie surrounding us. That was actually the night that I actually knew we had made a movie. I know that sounds crazy, but that movie...
No, but that's so interesting. In contrast to the way you felt on Margin Call, that it built, and you knew, man, we're right on this. And then this movie is quite the opposite.
It was a disaster because it's super fun. So I was delusional and trying to have fun the whole time I was doing it. But you didn't know if it was a movie. So, so the crazy thing is as I'm editing Margin Call, I write this thing, which I'm not sure what it is. It starts with a farewell letter that begins the movie. And then I kind of constructed this crazy movie around this letter, and then went to Sundance, because this was before I'd ever gone to Sundance, and heard Robert Redford speak at a brunch, but never even met him. I walk in a little late, and he's just coming up to the podium, and he starts speaking, and I'm in the back of the room, and I can't hear him. And he's this little guy standing up there, just like any movie star from, a half a football field away. They're not so impressive, especially if you can't hear them.
Right.
And I'm hearing him coming from this small speaker that's on the other side of the room, and it's something about a whatever. And then this kid that works for the Institute comes behind me, and literally I look behind me and I realize there's a second speaker right over my head. And it's been, there's a technical issue. So the kid plugs in the speaker, and suddenly Robert Redford's voice, which you almost forget that you know that voice as well as you do. It's a voice that's part of you that you don't even know is a part of you. And it, does one of these. It kind of comes in like the voice of God. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, wow, maybe if you take Robert Redford's voice away from him, that might be a really cool way of sort of giving him an opportunity to do something new as an actor. And it was because sort of seeing him there, and because I hadn't thought of him for the part till that moment. So I offered it to him and sent him a script. It was only 32 pages.
And the script, I'm assuming, must just be descriptions of the shots.
Yeah, it looks like a script, and so it's written in that format, but it is literally a guy is asleep in the front of a boat. A large noise wakens him. He stands up. And so it sounds like it would be incredibly boring to read, but it's quick, and so much shit happens to him in that movie that when you read that over 30 minutes, because you actually read it way faster than you see it, which is not the way most scripts are. So you're getting to, the boat flips over, he swims out, So that script, interestingly, when you read it, you saw the movie, that script, Robert Redford being attached and me to direct it, is all that was ever created to finance what turned out to be a $12 million movie. It was not a cheap movie to make because it was so complicated and dangerous and everything else. But studio executives, really conservative guys and gals, would read that little document, and when you put it down, you were sort of like, oh, yeah, that's a crazy movie. Like, I see it. I saw the whole thing happen. Redford, read that immediately. And so I got a phone call, and it just said, Robert Redford would like to meet you about this.
Wow.
So I fly across the country. He doesn't live in L.A., but he's in L.A., so I meet him in this office in L.A. I walk in the room, and probably 6 minutes in, he sort of holds up his hand. I'm pitching him, my idea for the thing. And he basically says, I'm in.
Wow.
And he's like, you don't have to sell me on this one. I just wanted to make sure you weren't crazy, you know, but I'm in. And, you know, the joke is that my dad is in sales in the financial profession, always said when you make a deal, you get the fuck out of the room.
Right.
You know, like
once it's made,
once it's done, all you can do by staying in that room
is screw it up.
Screw it up. So I'm only 6 minutes into this meeting with Robert Redford.
And you're with Robert Redford. Who wants to leave the room when you're with Robert Redford?
So I'm like, just don't screw it up, is basically what I said. So we had a wonderful first meeting, but, getting him to say I'm in and actually getting him onto a boat, somewhere filming this was a very different route. So like 8 months later, when I got the Academy Award nomination, that suddenly, $12 million showed up like overnight.
Well, I mean, what a great combo. That nomination, Robert Redford, a script
and like an artsy, like the whole
really...
thing. Then, this is a kid we can get behind this. So we went to Mexico, figured out how to make this insane jigsaw puzzle, and then that's when I started to get some real confidence. That I actually did know what I was doing. About halfway through that shoot. I'm joking and saying that I didn't know at all the feelings. I felt like we were getting something special. So by the time I got into All Is Lost and shooting that, started to, get significantly more confident in my directing.
Were you totally focused on that, or did you start writing A Most Violent Year during that time?
I wrote A Most Violent Year during editing. I often write during editing, so I wrote that during editing. So that film kind of came out of, 50 different places, but was the most fun I had had writing something because I was starting to feel like I had command of what I was doing. It was a little bit difficult because it's the first time I wrote something that I knew actually, if I wanted it to, could get made, which is a far different. When I was writing All Is Lost, I had no idea anyone was ever going to actually...
Oh, I see. Sort of looking ahead and saying, this will get made even affects your writing process.
Yeah, and in our business, like, the logistical elements of your daily grind in actually making a movie are so overwhelming when you're actually, where do the trucks park? Where's the bathroom set up? Where's the lighting coming from? Blah, 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 These things rule your life for a year, but they should not rule your life as a writer because, it was the first time I ever found myself, writing a scene and being like, well, that's going to be a pain in the ass to shoot. Because I'm actually thinking I'm going to go shoot this.
Oh, I see. So you're saying it affects if you have in your brain some amazing shot and some
and you're
location,
like, that's not possible. I know that's not possible. And that's not always great for the story. So I sort of had to pull myself back and say, just, write this. But besides that, it was just a joy. Luckily, about halfway through writing Most Violent Year, and I kind of realized I'm going to do one more of these totally homegrown ideas. I'm getting given these amazing opportunities and all these amazing actors.
Right,
and
because I'm sure you
actresses.
could have shot somebody else's script or done something else
in a week, and that's and I do want to do that at some point because I'm now realizing after 3 that I do as a director want to challenge myself a little bit more and not do. Not that I won't go back to having written, directed, but you're so close to the material as a director when you've written and originated the idea that it can get in the way of, the best way to put it is you're limited by your own abilities as a writer when you're only writing things that you're directing.
Right.
I mean, only directing things that you're writing.
Right.
To challenge myself as a director, I do want to see what it's like to potentially do something that I didn't, flat out originated. It's also just from a business perspective and from an ego perspective, it's really fun to have come up with the idea and you sell the idea and write the script and someone gives you $50 million to go make it and everyone's there because you. That's really fun and it makes you feel really special and you think you're hot shit for the time you're shooting it. But in the end, the goal is to make the most interesting, best possible thing you can. And the other crazy thing is from people wanting to collaborate with you, if you know the answers to every one of the questions, people don't challenge you in the way that they should, probably, because this guy wrote it. He's God on this set, and a director is already that enough. So I do want to make sure that I'm not allowing myself to fall into, a rut creatively. But that's a great problem to have.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a bad place to be.
I'll take it, considering where I was 5 years ago. So.
A Most Violent Year did really well. The performances were great, and it got some great reviews. What's next on the list for you right now?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I attached myself to a big, huge movie about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
I was wondering what the status of that
Yeah,
was.
So the status is they're shooting that movie, but I'm not there. So that should tell you. But look, I mean, contractually, I'm not allowed to actually talk about it too much. But exactly what went down. But essentially, the takeaway from it that I felt was I'd taken all these years to build up finally a reputation where people felt my work was of a certain level of quality. And in this particular instance, there were real amazing people's lives who had been horribly affected by this tragedy that the movie was about, that I felt that I owed it to them to tell a certain version of that movie. And I compromise, but when I saw where things were heading, not that there isn't potentially another great version of the movie that they're making, but when I saw that the version that I was intending to make was no longer, feasible, it just wasn't something I could stand behind.
So where are you now with your next project?
It's super exciting. We're, my two producing partners and I are forming a little company for the first time. We've sort of just gone from film to film to film here the last 5 years, but we're now setting up a little company and going to help some other people get movies made, which great. I've been very selfish the last 5 years, both with my family and professionally. So we're kind of setting up.
You were busy. You had a few projects.
No, it's exactly right. And I needed to lock myself in a little bit and let people know that I could do this. I have something that I've written, which I may go do right now. But I am also flat out, entertaining really fun offers to do more of just a directing gig where I come in and rewrite something. I feel extremely fortunate. I'm looking at an amazing caliber of projects. Probably going to go do one of those this winter. So I'm taking the rest of the summer, spend a little time with the family, and but then come September, it's time to go, back to work.
Well, I don't know. I've known you and seen you off and on for 7-10 years. I'm
10
not
years,
sure, but
probably.
It's amazing to see this progression. It just kind of blows my mind. And I love our meetings like every 2 years, and you've got some amazing new story to tell me, and it's exciting, And
it's been fun for me too, I can tell you.
It seems like you're, as I said before, using maturity and some smarts to make some good creative decisions, and that's good for all of us because we get to see the output of that.
Yeah, and if you look at that business will chew you up and spit you out. It's an amazing opportunity. It's not like really any other kind of storytelling. You need hundreds of, if not thousands of people. You need, millions of dollars in the sort of lowest end. And a lot of people want to be doing it and are ready to kind of take your space. And so in a fun way, what I also realized is I don't want to just keep making movies just because I can. I want to make sure there's a reason to do it and that it's, that I'm devoting all these resources to something that I can actually stand behind. So, and I think I wouldn't have done that if my opportunities had come a little earlier. But it's also super fun. I think the one of the greatest things that's happened to me through this whole last stage of my life is to realize that the 10, 15 years of struggle, which when you're a lawyer and you're going to law school, and even in the music business, you at least hopefully have some songs and you have some output along the way. But a lot of the time in film, you've got these things that, a soap commercial does not seem to have a direct line to margin call, if that is indeed your end goal. And I wasn't even making good soap commercials. I was sort of making mediocre soap commercials. So the idea that all of that sort of struggle and learning all of those things, and that I actually was putting new little arrows in my quiver with each one of those experiences, all of these lessons over those 10 years to realize that that was law school. That was my internship. That was my first job. That was my, that all of those things that I was actually learning things from those that I now can call on when a lot of that's going on. You're sitting there, filming your 19th interview with some person talking about, arthritis medication. You're sort of like, what the fuck does this have to do
with me being a film director, screenwriter?
But looking back on it now, that first day on set with Stanley Tucci and Paul Bettany, it was a very complicated scene, and it was kind of the first thing I ever shot as a feature film director. The reason I was able to do what I was able to do on that first day was because of all those years.
So a real culmination of all the knowledge that maybe you didn't even know was there until it was called on.
Exactly, and that's something I am, forever grateful for.
And the fact that you knew to learn it and knew to use it later is also is great.
Well, I am definitely, if nothing, a case study in not giving up, because there's maybe 3 things out of 50 from that 10 or 15 years leading up that were outside of or above sort of mediocre, which is not a great output. But once I tackled long-form storytelling, I realized that was something that I actually inherently and instinctively, but also learned, that I think that I could do that. So hopefully it stays with me.
Well, I look forward to the next project, whatever it is, and I'm certainly enjoying what you've done so far. So thanks, JC. Thanks for coming in to have a chat. This has really been fun.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me, and I'll see you soon.
I was going to say, I look forward to seeing you on the beach. Okay, bye, man. For more information on JC Chandor, give him a Google, and you'll find lots out there. There are some great interviews online regarding each of his films. Watch Margin Call, All Is Lost, and A Most Violent Year on your favorite streaming service. I'm not kidding. They're really good films. Our friend Nathan Larson wrote the music you're hearing, which is from the soundtrack of Margin Call. For more interviews, information, and links, go to roomtoneradio.com. Subscribe to Roomtone on iTunes, and check for Roomtone interviews on YouTube. Remember, an interesting conversation beats talking to yourself. See you next time. Great, JC. Thank you, man.
Awesome, dude.
We talked for a good long time there.
I know. Super
95 minutes.
I have a problem. Normally these guys want like straight sound bites. They're like, this is a 2-minute piece.
Right.